Hello and welcome to my stream today. My name is Dr. Rachel Tatman and this is my YouTube channel, which is for anyone who cares about language technology and other people. And today I'm going to answer one of the questions I get asked the most, which is what projects can I do to help improve my machine learning abilities, my natural language processing abilities. And I'm not going to talk a whole bunch about speech here, but some of the things I'll talk about would also apply to speech technology. So I didn't forget about y'all. All right. Let's just hop right in. I'm pretty sure I can see all the chats correctly. So, like I mentioned, this is a question I get asked a lot, and I get it. It's very overwhelming. And specifically, the thing that I'm going to be talking about today is a situation where you've done, intro coursework, or you've taken some, courses, or you've done some online tutorials and you're starting to get your feet under you and you're like, okay, now I want to do my own thing. What is that going to look like? What should my own thing be? And so the way I've organized this is I have 10 projects and I'm going to talk about them in the order that I'd recommend that you do them. Hello, Naveen, welcome to the stream. I'm so glad. And I'm going to talk about them in the order that I'd recommend that you do them, and they'll sort of grow increasingly complex, have more and more moving parts. So let's hop right in. Number 10. Well, I mean, I've numbered them 1 to 10, but it is kind of a countdown. Although I guess it's also kind of a count up because it's the order that I recommend. Anyway, so first off is I would recommend writing a survey paper. So we actually talked about a blog post based on a survey paper last week that looked at all of the different multilingual embedding models, large multilingual embedding models that had been published and made public before Bloom came out. And a survey paper is a type of scientific paper. So if you search, the ACL proceedings or the IEEE archive, and you search for survey paper, you'll find a bunch of examples of this. You can sort of see what they look like. And basically it's an overview of how everyone has tried to do something specific in the past, right? So in a field like linguistics, it could be like, here's all the ways that people have theorized about a specific syntactic structure. And in natural language processing, it might be something like, here's all of the approaches to a specific task, like, let's say named entity recognition, or, event detection in text or social media, or whatever it is specifically that you're looking at. And the reason that I suggest doing this first is because NLP has been a field for, quite a while now, basically as long as there have been computers. And chances are, if you want to do something, somebody else has already done it, and the approach that they've chosen is going to be good for some applications and less good for other applications, and then other people have come and built on their work, and on and on and on. So basically, writing a survey paper helps you avoid reinventing the wheel, and it gives you a deeper understanding of what's possible, what was possible at a specific point in time, and what everyone has done. And then if you want to go and, write a paper, you're going to need to include this type of information in the literature review, saying like, X has done this, Y has done this, Z has done this, we're doing this other thing, and here's why it's different. And even if you're not interested in writing scientific papers, they also make really good blog posts. And I think they're really good preparation for technical interviews as well, because it gives you a concrete example to really think about different techniques, their application to a problem, and then the pros and cons of them, which is something that I'd expect to cover in a technical interview, depending on the role. But I would if I were doing a technical interview. All right, so second problem or type of task, and this is a system or systems evaluation. So basically this is again, this is a type of paper. So if you search for system evaluation or systems evaluation in various scholarly proceedings, you'll find them, and you can see examples of what these look like. And these give you a chance to use some existing systems and figure out if they work, when they work, how well they work, I think a particularly useful type of system evaluation is on non-leaderboard data, right? So if a system was trained, let's say for glue, and you have an additional task that was not covered in glue, that gives you information on how extensible all of these different systems are. And it's really beneficial to the field because it gives us more information at a sort of a field level about the degree to which systems are or aren't overfitting to specific leaderboards. And it's, again, great job preparation, great skills up leveling, because it helps you work through deployments, right? If the system is available as an API, you get to learn to do API calls. You get to figure out, your data pipeline, how to do the same thing using different systems, which is super helpful, super valuable, and definitely something you can talk about in a tech interview as well if you're trying to get a job. All right, number 3. So you've done your survey, you understand what other people have done, you've done your systems evaluation, you've sort of kicked the tires, you've tried out the systems. Now, adding on to that, doing some building, doing some coding, and helping out. So open source contributions, another really fabulous thing. They help out the community. They show up if people are looking for examples of your work, because open source is obviously open source, which means that people can see the source code, people can see the code that you wrote and you merged, and they're like, oh, that looks like good code, good job, I would hire this person. And what I would do, especially if this is your first time, is I would look for open issues on a repository. So basically, if there's something that you want to make a commit to, or let's say a project that you've been using, and you're like, I really want to give back, I think this is a great project and I want to help them out, go to the GitHub, look for open issues, and then see if one of them is something that you feel like you could handle. And some projects will actually have issues tagged, like this is great for beginners, or this is great for a first-time contribution. Also, you get the benefit of having your code reviewed by someone who's familiar with the code base. So you also get, particularly if you've been a student and you haven't had a lot of chance to collaborate with people on code, this gives you a sense of that sort of like software machine learning engineering. Probably not machine learning engineering for open source contributions, but it gives you a sense of that software engineering lifecycle and what it's like to do the work. And my general advice is, I would try to stick to smaller, more specialized packages. Maybe one of the ones you use in a system evaluation, so you really, you understand how it works, you understand its benefits and drawbacks, you have sort of a deeper understanding and make a real meaningful contribution. If you're trying, and also, the stakes are lower. So if you want to make your first contribution to NumPy, know what you're doing, right? Because if it's a very important central library that a lot of people rely on, the sort of bar for, making sure that you've really thought through everything that you're doing is much higher. And the likelihood that your contribution is going to be rejected is also much higher, because it needs to be useful to everyone who uses the library. So I'd recommend starting with smaller libraries that you've used and are really familiar with, and you're like, you know what, they've got an open issue, I can tackle this. And you also get to learn about, source control, best practices, what it's like to do professional software engineering. Hello, Lydia. Welcome to the stream. So you've done your survey paper, you know what's out there, you've done your systems evaluations, you've tried them, you've done your open source contribution, you've written some code, you've gotten a chance to work in this sort of collaborative environment with code. At this point, I'd recommend replicating a research paper. So NLP in particular has a pretty strong tradition of open science. So that's this idea that if I am publishing a scientific paper, my code, my data perhaps should be available to everyone, right? The paper should be free to read. It should sort of increase the sum of human knowledge, and it should just be available. And this is sort of in opposition to the traditional publishing model where, Elsevier has the papers and charges you to publish there and charges you to see the papers. So it's sort of a oppositional to science publishing as a business model. Like I said, NLP has a pretty strong tradition of this. So the most fancy, most well-regarded publication venue in natural language processing in English-speaking literature, I should say. I'm not super in Congress. discussion with people who are publishing in Chinese in particular. I don't know what the best publication venue is for that. But it has the best venue for English language research is the Association for Computational Linguistics, and all Association for Computational Linguistics published papers are available in the anthology back to like the 60s when the organization started. So very strong commitment to this. If you are trying to find code in a paper to replicate, so first off, you can search for GitHub links in paper. Often in papers, people will often share their code through GitHub, and they'll put the links in the paper. You could also check out Papers with Code or Distill. Those are both sort of publication venues, but not necessarily peer-reviewed publication venues. I think Distill does have peer review. I don't think Papers with Code does. I think it's just a linking of a paper and a code with the assumption that the paper has already been published. So those are some places to look. And you can also reach out to the researchers who wrote the paper if you can't find the code. Sometimes you'll get some pushback from that, but oftentimes researchers, particularly in NLP, particularly in machine learning, are delighted that you're trying to build on their work, and we'll get back to you and be like, yeah, absolutely, here you go. And the really big benefit from this, from a professional development standpoint, is that you get to practice working with other people's code. So particularly if you've been a student and you've been doing, school assignments or, maybe bootcamp assignments, those are oftentimes simplified to help you learn the specific thing that you're trying to learn in that assignment. Unfortunately, the code you'll find in real life out there in the world tends to be a little bit messier, tends to be a little bit harder to follow, may not be documented super well. So it gives you some experience kind of wading through other people's code that may not be super polished and trying to figure out what's going on. And that's super valuable as a professional skill. So nice bonus there for the research paper replication. This could also potentially be something you could publish if you are interested. There are journals that publish specifically replication papers. All right, one level up in, I would say, complexity, because now you're switching to a different skill set, is to add annotations to an existing data set. So, we're all machine learning, we're all natural language processing. We know that you need data to make things work, and you need oftentimes labeled data. I know unsupervised learning is sort of the hot thing right now, but there's a lot of supervised learning and a lot of supervised learning needs and a lot of labeling that needs to be done and annotations that need to be done. So there is much more unlabeled than labeled data out there in the world, and you can make a really big impact by just providing annotations. So if you wanted to do this as like a research, a research project, or you had a specific need and you can't find the data set for it, or you can find the data set but it's not labeled, you can do your own entirely new set of annotations for your particular task. So this is, like I said, this is a little bit more ambitious than trying to replicate existing work because you're doing more new things, and you'll get experience, writing annotation guidelines, doing the annotation, right? Doing the task that our work relies on gives you a really good, visceral, I would say, understanding of what's going on, what sort of quirks might be in the data, where those might come from, right? So it's, there's a saying in English about how you see how the sausage gets made, right? You sort of see inside the process and see what's going on. If you don't want to do everything yourself, you can also try out data labeling using a hosted service. So Zooniverse is a pretty common one. If you're familiar with Galaxy Zoo, it was one of the earliest citizen science data labeling projects. And now, researchers who need data labeled can put it up on Zooniverse, and you can just, hop in for a couple minutes and, click on pictures of penguins or, type annotations or something. So that's a little bit of a lower investment way to do that. And I think this is something that will, if you have not previously done data annotation, really change your view on the field. And I think will give you a lot of sort of practical experience and intuitions that make data cleaning in particular much, much easier. So highly recommend this. All right. Next up, so this is kind of a continuation of the replication of a research project, but this is doing an ablation study. So ablation studies are another thing that could be a research contribution if you're interested. And the way that it works is ablating, to shrink. You take an existing model and you remove things, right? So you remove layers, you remove weights, you reduce dimensions. You might reduce the amount of training data that's used. So you make the model or the training data smaller, less complex, and you see what happens, basically. It's machine learning. We're doing guessing and testing. And the value of this type of study is by looking at what happens when you remove things, you can begin to increase your understanding of what those things are doing in the model. Because I mean, those of you who've been in the field for a while know this, but we don't have a very good theoretical understanding of how the architecture of a machine learning model relates to its ability to do a specific task, right? So if I'm doing machine learning engineering for a specific task, I can't just look at the task and the data and say, I know the best model for this will be X. I have to do multiple models and compare them to find out which one's the best, because we just are lacking that theoretical underpinning. And we're getting there. I have high hopes that at some point we won't have to do the guessing and testing, but right now we do. And best case scenario, you find that removing things doesn't change task performance, which means that you can train and use a smaller model, which is fabulous, right? We all like small models. They're cheap. So really interesting, really useful, really valuable work. You get to learn a lot about not only the internals of whatever library you're using, but you also get a lot of practice with tracking lots of different types of models and their input and their output, and that sort of experimentation flow without having progressively bigger and bigger models, right? So in terms of a way to work with the machine learning pipeline, ML ops, some people will call it, this is a cheap way to do it, and I am aware that compute is not free. So really good, really practical, great experience, and also kind of fun. I like doing ablation studies. I think they're a fun thing to do. All right. So now we're getting on to, you're not just modifying something that's existing, but you're trying to make your own new thing. So things are getting more and more complex. They're going to require more and more experience. They're going to require more and more work and time, which is why I put them in this order. Oh yeah, alas, it is not a green screen thing. My coffee mug has suffered an accident, but I'm just gonna keep using it until it's unusable. So extending a research paper. Most research is done with the understanding that it is part of a continuing stream almost. So I talked about the survey papers, right? The first project where you're building your understanding by looking at, okay, person A did this, person B did this, person C did this, person A did this again in reaction to what person C did. And that's sort of building on previous work and continuing to, hopefully improve systems is sort of the way that research works. So when you publish a research paper, your hope is that other people will use what you found out in their own work. And that's what you're doing here. And so I'm not saying start a new research program, but take an existing paper and be like, you know what if I tried this and try this and see what happens? So in research papers, you can check out the future directions section in the paper if they have one, to see sort of what the authors thought would be nice next steps. If you are interested in publishing the paper, it's fine to do, but might be a little bit awkward if you ever talk to the authors. If they're like, the next thing we're going to do is this, and you're like, oh, I'll do that. And then you go and do that, and you're both trying to get it published at the same time. So I would say maybe if there's a paper that's from a couple of years ago and you haven't seen any other papers by those authors expanding on those future directions, that's probably fine. Or you could ask the authors, right? They may currently be working on it and be happy for an extra set of hands, potentially. So good place to check. Be a little bit sensitive if you are also a researcher and planning on publishing the research papers. You may get a little bit of beef, or a little bit of contentious feelings between people. But as you read more and more papers, as you do more and more projects, right? At this point, if you've done each of these projects in order, particularly if you're working on a specific topic, as you're reading papers, you'll probably be like, oh yeah, this system did this system did this other thing. What if we like combine them, or we switch their methodologies, or I tried this additional thing that I know about from my reading. So the more you look at systems, the more you understand how they work, the more you use them, the more and more ideas you'll get about like, oh yeah, I could do that. Oh yeah, I could do that. And my sort of general piece of advice, if you ever feel like you have no idea what to do, is to read more, to look more at other people's systems, to understand more what other people are doing. Because we're not, right? It's a field. It's a social interaction and structure that we have with each other, and you don't need to do everything from scratch all the time. And in fact, it is a huge waste of time if you do that. And no one expects it. If someone is telling you that they expect it, they're out of step with the rest of the field, I would say. So. And at this point, right, if you finish this project, definitely a publishable paper. And yeah, I say publishable paper. This is definitely a project that could turn into a publishable paper. Getting published in machine learning, because the field is growing so quickly, can be a little bit difficult. All right, number 8. This is harder than writing a research paper. And this is collecting a completely new data set, right? So I think if you've been in machine learning for a little bit, you've probably been in the situation where you're like, I want to do this. I'm going to find a data set. And there just isn't one, right? Like maybe you really want to work with a specific human language, or you need a particular type of interaction, or you're studying a specific event and you need news stories about that event, but they haven't been collected. And at that point, you've got to collect a new data set because what you want doesn't exist or isn't available. And I'm just going to warn you right off the bat, of all of the things that I have mentioned, this is far and away the most potentially time intensive. If you haven't done a lot of data collection and annotation before, you may be surprised to hear that. But think about how much more work it is to do data cleaning than it is just to, put together some parameters and train a model. And then that relationship sort of continues to creating the data set in the first place. It can be very, very time consuming, but very rewarding. Naresh says, sometimes I feel overwhelmed with all the stuff out there and end up doing nothing. Yeah, so if that is your, if that's your situation, what I would recommend is focusing on something very, very narrow. If you've ever read even just the title of someone's PhD dissertation, usually it's like, a study of X in Y at time period, with a particular focus on X, Y, and Z, right? It's very, very, very narrow. So I would recommend, if you're feeling super overwhelmed, find one thing that interests you, read one paper on that, one recent paper, look at what they've cited, go back and read those papers, look at what other papers have cited that paper, read those papers, and focus on like a tiny, tiny, tiny task, something very bounded, something very specific. Particularly if you're a student or a learner working on your own, no one expects you to train a Bloom model, right? And if you expect you to do that, you can feel really frustrated and overwhelmed. And I think that's reasonable because that's not something that one person does, right? And as you're looking at papers, you're looking at projects, you'll notice there's a lot of co-authors, right? It's fairly rare in natural language processing for a paper to have a single author. So if you're just one person doing something on your own, know that it is okay if it is small, it's okay if it is focused, and in fact, that's preferable, both for you and also for the people who are reading the thing, right? Think about the things that you have searched on Stack Overflow. It's specific, and the thing that's most helpful for you in that situation are specific answers to your specific questions. So don't feel like you need to do everything, right? Like going through all these tasks, these could all be on just named entity recognition in Romanian. You could be doing all of this on that. I mean, that's still a pretty big task, right? It's a whole language, but you could be doing all of those things on this one fairly narrow topic and just ignoring everything else. So put your blinders on, head down, focus on something narrow is my recommendation. But yeah, it can definitely be overwhelming. It's a very fast growing field. So there's always going to be more research than you can read, and that's okay. Don't feel like you have to read it all. Focus. Narrow focus. So collecting a data set, very time intensive, very rewarding. Again, definitely a publishable contribution. You'll see particularly these papers at LREC, L-R-E-C, which is a conference that happens every 2 years. Also a good place to look for data if you're interested. And working with raw data, particularly as a way to prepare yourself for professional work in machine learning, language technology, is irreplaceable, right? You need it. You're gonna get raw data. Someone's gonna hand you, a USB stick with some SQL files on it. And first you're gonna verify that that is what's on there, and, check with security to make sure that that is in fact something that you can and should use. And it's gonna be unlabeled, and the column names are gonna be wrong, and there's gonna be like a missing date range, and there'll be typos in some of the categorical values, and you're gonna have to figure out how to work with it because that's what you've got and that's what you need to work with. So yes, working with data that you've collected is super, super valuable. And once you have the data set, well, now you can do, you can do papers building on top of it, and you already know what's in the data set. You already have your data cleaning pipeline set up. So it can be a really, really good way to launch, a series of projects or a research program. You're very welcome, Naresh. I hope that was helpful. It can definitely be easy to get overwhelmed. All right. Number 9. So this is not the last one. I think the last one is a little bit more involved and difficult and requires more specialized knowledge than this. But, at this point, you know how to collect data. You know how to find out how people have approached a specific problem. You know how to work with a code base. You know how to work with other people's code. You know how to use version control, right? You're getting to the point where you're confident in your abilities and you can make something that you wish existed, right? So for me, this is why, why I think language technology is great, is that we can build useful things using it. And if you are working on something that you want to exist and you have the skills to make it, you're going to be way more motivated to keep with it. So I think I've talked about this on my channel before. But in knitting, to bring in another field, there are ideas of, there's the idea of the project knitter and the product knitter and the process knitter. And the process knitter knits because it's fun, and the product knitter knits because they want the garment, right? They're like, I need that sweater, I'm gonna make it. And particularly if you are motivated by like, I want this thing, I'm gonna make it. This is, I think, the very best type of project you can do. Again, if that's what your motivation is. So if you're, if you've been in NLP for a while and you're looking for, something to really, really stretch yourself, and you have an idea of something that you want, go make the thing, right? You've got the ability, you've got the libraries, you've got the knowledge. This is like the payoff for all the work that you've been doing. But Rachel, that's just number 9. What's number 10? So number 10, I would say, is, depending on your your background and your interests and your needs, maybe a little bit less fun, potentially. I still think it's very fun, but also very valuable, very important work. And that is to recreate something in a new human language, right? So particularly if this is a language that's been underserved by the NLP community. And there are many, many, many of those, right? The vast majority of NLP research is on, the same 5-10 languages. There's, thousands and thousands of human languages out in the world. Most of them don't have, a parser, a tokenizer, a stemmer, stop word lists. As a field, we're sort of moving away from stop word lists, but for small data sets, they can still be very, very useful. And if you need to do NLP in a language because that's what's important to you and valuable to you and your community needs, it's difficult. You really have to build stuff from scratch. So I mentioned to avoid building stuff from scratch if at all possible. Sometimes it is not possible, and that's when this final sort of, I would say, most complex project comes in. And the reason it's complex is this can be very, very involved, particularly if you're like, I want to build, a news story recommendation algorithm for a language with a writing set that's not an ASCII. You're going to have a lot of work ahead of you, but that could be super duper valuable. It could be super useful. It could be super impactful it's going to take time. It's going to take effort. So yeah, I know many of you are multilingual, and I'd particularly recommend working in a language that you know and use so you can evaluate the goodness of the tools and that needs additional support. So yeah, if that's you, do it. I believe in you. Yeah, and I think the sort of the benefit of that is not only do you build something that is interesting and cool and you like in a language that you're using, but also a lot of other people might need those same tools and might, find the work that you've done very valuable and very helpful. And I think that's a nice feeling. So if that's also something that you think is a nice feeling, yeah, give this a shot. So that is the list, all the way from writing a survey paper, just sort of looking at what other people have done, understanding it, sort of rephrasing it, so you have a nice little compact, introduction to a specific task, all the way to building NLP projects in languages that don't have, basic tooling support, but still where the people who are speaking them have a need, or who are using them, I should say, not necessarily just speaking, have a need for language technology. So that is the top 10 best ML and NLP projects to help you level up. I don't know if you noticed, but I had like a sort of a tabletop role-playing game theme to the slide deck because I thought it would be fun. And if you would like the slides, they are on my Ko-fi, which is linked, there, and these are just free for everybody because I think that this, again, I mentioned I get asked this a lot, and I think that it's useful and valuable, and I want you to have this resource. Also, I can just give the link to people who ask me, not because I don't care and not because I don't want to help, but I am pretty much full up on mentoring right now. So that is the stream today. I want to thank you all for joining me. I'm going to try and keep it at sort of a tight 30 minutes. And I do want to wrap up by thanking, speaking of coffee, my generous monthly coffee supporters. So I'm trying to do, this is my full-time job, and they're helping make it possible. So thank you very much, everyone who is supporting me on Ko-fi. I appreciate you. You make this possible. And thank all of you for watching. So I hope you found this useful, valuable. I hope it helps you feel less overwhelmed and more focused. And as you were watching through, you got an idea and you're like, oh, yeah, I see how that project could apply to something I'm working on. I'm going to try that out. So I hope you do try it out. We'll be back on Thursday for our usual coffee chat, which is, a discussion of news, ethical things that have come up, research papers, just sort of general stuff that's happened in the world of machine learning and natural language processing and language technology in the last week. So that'll be on Thursday, same time. I'd love to have you. Otherwise, I will see you later. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.